The genre of the Western has often been used to create a visual history of America's past. But more so than this, the Western has been a tool of reaffirming traditional forms of U.S. ideology. While directors and writers have often tried to reshape and reimagine the Western in new light, take for example those Westerns that would fall under the title revisionist Westerns, for example Unforgiven or Dances with Wolves, there is one film that really strikes the heart of not just the Western, but the ideology that underlies many of these films. Dead Man, directed by Jim Jarmusch and distributed by Miramax in 1995, is perhaps the boldest attempt at this sort of revisionist or anti-Western style. But before getting into Dead Man, it's important to look at the man behind the film, Jim Jarmusch.
The Western it's a kind of allegorical open form. I like that about it. It's kind of a fantasy world that America has used to kind of process its own history through, often stamping a lot of ideology all over it in the case.
Jim Jarmusch was born in 1953 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. By the time of the release of Dead Man in 1995, Jarmusch had already written and directed 5 films, all independently shot and released. Earlier films such as Stranger Than Paradise released in 1984 created huge slashes in the American independent scene.
Why is it called TV dinner?
Supposed to eat it while you watch TV. Television.
I know what a TV is.
Jarmusch's films prior to Dead Man often featured petty criminals, oddball outsiders, and heavy features of other outsider artists, an editing style that was laid back but still engaging. Many of these features would lead Jarmusch to be an indie darling throughout the 80s. The release of Dead Man would leave many American critics conflicted though. Much of this is due to the far more serious nature of the film and Jarmusch's bold decision that cut directly against the norms of both its genre and the industry. It's the audience into a different side of the West, one that isn't often seen. The main character, William Blake, is an effeminate outsider in the cold, apathetic world of the frontier. A deeply contrasted black and white coloring opens up the West as not a bold land to be settled, but rather a chaotic playground for those hungry for money and work. After Blake spends the night with former prostitute Theo Russell, her former lover, Charlie Dickinson, rushes into the room. Theo is shot dead by Charlie and critically injures Blake. After killing Charlie, Blake is left on the run with a gunshot wound just short of his heart. Unconscious in the woods, Blake is picked up by an indigenous American by the name of Nobody, who starts Blake's journey into the afterlife.
That's one thing that kind of annoys me about it, is how mythological it becomes. Like Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people in Westerns in classic Hollywood Westerns, are almost like mythological people that never really existed, like dinosaurs that once roamed the land, but they aren't really real to us. And that I find deeply upsetting.
Jarmusch took a considerable amount of time researching indigenous cultures in preparation for the movie. Looking to reject past stereotypes of indigenous culture, the world of Dead Man is littered with genocidal remnants of colonization across the land. The skeletons of buffalo that are hunted for sport are ever present. Burned remains of indigenous tribes line the rivers, and the issue of treatment of indigenous communities is left open and visible for both Blake and the audience to see. The character of Nobody, played by Gary Farmer, is presented as his own unique character with his own identity, background, conflicts, and motives. Often Nobody and other indigenous characters in the film speak in Cree and Blackfoot, which is left intentionally unsubtitled. The cinematography for the film is done by another independent icon, Robbie Mueller, who has worked with people like Wim Wenders and Lars von Trier. Often in production, Mueller and Jarmusch will shoot with no storyboards or shot list, instead relying on instinct and intuition.
A lot of interesting things while scouting for this film together, which was we'd find the most dramatic, incredibly beautiful landscape you could imagine, and then we would turn our backs on it and film the other way. And this is something Robbie was like, look how magnificent that is, we've seen it in a fucking calendar.
William Blake, played by Johnny Depp, also defies many Western conventions. Blake, a sophisticated and meek man from Cleveland, goes west looking to start his life anew, but only finds his death in this land. Rather than pushing his ideals and values in the world around him, Blake, as he is dying, is forced to take on the identities of those around him. Blake is not a lover, but is left to find comfort in Theo. Blake is not a murderer, but is left to defend himself from those around him. And Blake is certainly not indigenous, but is left to find himself through the spiritual journey that Nobody takes him on. Jarmusch is unique, even in the world of indie directors, with him owning the negatives to all his films, leaving him virtually in complete control of the editing of the film. The score too deserves attention as well. Instead of a typical big and bombastic scores you would hear from somebody like Ennio Morricone, Jarmusch enlists folk artist Neil Young to compose the score. Using a single guitar, Young crafted the score by improvising based on his emotional reaction over watching the film several times. This stripped-back and largely ambient score heightens the feelings of alienation and spiritual struggle faced by Blake throughout. It's hard to imagine this film not done by an independent filmmaker like Jim Jarmusch. So many of the creative decisions were only available due to his unique status as an outside artist. And while many American audiences didn't get the movie, it was certainly well received and respected by various indigenous cultures and tribes. And I think this is really the strength of the movie, its justice that it gives to its materials and its characters.